It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must.
We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
On Arctic sovereignty, we stand firmly with Greenland and Denmark and fully support their unique right to determine Greenland's future. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. So what are our options? In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he...
Yeah, I think the speech hit a number of the right topics and tones that need to be communicated on. But I will say that there continues to be an expectation for the Prime Minister to deliver results on all of these fronts, both foreign and domestic. And I think that he's going to see continued pressure on the domestic front to deliver.
Maureen.
I think it was honest and intentional, but what I read between the lines was it would give him more of a social license or political license to get into agreements or deals where workers and families would be on the receiving end.
I don't recall in history Canada ever standing up to the U.S. quite in this way. Now, we've never had a situation like this, but Carney, again, did not specifically mention Trump, but he was certainly referring to him when he stated great powers are using economic integrations as weapons, tariffs as coercion, and supply chains to be exploited. Donald Trump, unsurprisingly, is not happy. Let's listen to what he had to say about that.
Going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
Well, that is some message. What do you think is going to happen as a result of all of this? Trump is mercurial, and he's known to hold a grudge. Marion.
I mean, it's escalating very quickly, and you're right. But I think there needs to be some de-escalation. I think the speech was a call to action.
Jeff.
Yeah, I think that there's certainly risk in doing that. We need to get to a point where we can get this deal done with the U.S. as well. And so putting our thumb in their eye is certainly a challenge. But I think that the way that the Prime Minister positioned it yesterday, there is the capacity to identify the areas where we can thank the U.S., on where we do things really well together as partners. And whether that's security or trade, we can do that together and talk about the benefits that it brings to both of our countries.
Ashley, do you think that this is putting our trade talks in peril?
I think that what Prime Minister Carney said as a message to Trump yesterday is, obviously, we need to continue to work with you on those areas of agreement, but that Canada is no longer going to just be beholden to the United States. And he talked about an interconnected web across nations, working with more middle powers. And I think the thesis of a Carney government is Canada and U.S., yes, we're always going to be friends. Yes, we're always going to share this massive border. But Canada needs to have more allies abroad, more trade relationships abroad. And it can no longer be that our economy is so solely linked to the United States.
Yes, but it's going to take time to build those relationships. And what does Canada do between now and potentially, I mean, how many years is it going to take to build up enough trade to compensate for what we're losing from the U.S.? Jeff?
I fundamentally don't think we can, actually.
Okay.
I think the diversification of trade is really critical to our economy, but that is something that we as a country have identified in the last 30, 40 years as well. But the reality is that we do share this border. The reality is that we do have common interests from a trade perspective, and we cannot untie all of the logistical and strategic planning that we have done around trade and manufacturing across our border. That does not become disentangled as quickly as I think we need it to.
It places the sign any way to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack. Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down. For decades. For decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we called the rules-based international order. We joined its institutions, we praised its principles, we benefited from its predictability. And because of that, we could pursue values-based foreign policies under its protection. We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. The multilateral institutions on which the middle powers have relied, the WTO, the UN, the COP, the architecture, the very architecture of collective problem solving are under threat. And as a result, many countries are drawing the same conclusions, that they must develop greater strategic autonomy in energy, food, critical minerals, in finance and supply chains. And this impulse is understandable. A country that can't feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. But let's be clear-eyed about where this leads. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And there's another truth. If great powers abandon even the pretense of rules and values for the unhindered pursuit of their power and interests, the gains from transactionalism will become harder to replicate. Hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships. Allies will diversify to hedge against uncertainty. They'll buy insurance, increase options in order to rebuild sovereignty. Sovereignty that was once grounded in rules but will increasingly be anchored in the ability to withstand pressure. this room knows this is classic risk management. Risk management comes at a price. But that cost of strategic autonomy, of sovereignty, can also be shared. Collective investments in resilience are cheaper than everyone building their own fortresses. Shared standards reduce fragmentations. Complementarities are positive sum. And the question for middle powers like Canada is not whether to adapt to the new reality. We must. The question is whether we adapt by simply building higher walls or whether we can do something more ambitious. Now, Canada was amongst the first to hear the wake-up call, leading us to fundamentally shift our strategic posture. Canadians know that our old, comfortable assumptions that our geography and alliance memberships automatically conferred prosperity and security, that assumption is no longer valid. And our new approach rests on what Alexander Stubb, the President of Finland, has termed value-based realism.